Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa-kafa. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ibadihi alladhina istafa. First of all, I want to say thank you to the organizers of this conference for allowing me and my fellow academics and professionals to address the issue of financial inclusion within Islamic finance. Being 6th or 7th in the line is a bit difficult because I don't want to repeat what has already been said. But I will start from Dr. Henry's wonderful speech. I think, and really we need to, I think we need to pay attention to what he just said, because he has illustrated very briefly an alternative system. When we talk about Islamic finance, we start from the theoretical point of view and Islamic economics, and we start from alternatives. Okay, we have capitalism, we have socialism, and Islamic economics presented as an alternative, a sustainable, equitable, just alternative system. And yet, as has already been said before, a lot of what is being done in Islamic finance industry today, for one reason or another, I'm not doubting the intentions of people, but for practical reasons, much of it could not be truly alternative from the conventional system. However, examples like Dr. Henry has just explained, especially in Indonesia, I think the initiatives in Indonesia are really underexposed to the world audience. I mean, what is happening there is really grassroots development. It's not big financing from the top, it's not big government projects, it's people helping themselves. Yes. And if you look at them, some of them are very small projects, some of them are larger, some of them are growing. All of them have been successful to a great extent. And really it's a wonderful, for those academics who want to do research, in-depth research, really I would advise you to study the Indonesian models of development at grassroots level. Moving on from that to come to the issue of financial inclusion, I just want to highlight some things, because we only have a few minutes, that we should be thinking about when we talk about these things. A lot of this terminology is taken straight from the West. That's the way of the world today. The Western capitalist system dominates the world. The Western education system dominates the world. We get our terminologies from the textbooks written by the professors who sit in the West. Financial inclusion is one of these terms. It's a buzzword these days. If you look back 5-10 years, nobody talked about financial inclusion. In those days, people talked about microfinance. The Green Bank in Bangladesh was held up as an ideal model. It was promoted around the world by the United Nations, by the World Bank. Microfinance was held up as the ideal. And then what happened was, upon closer inspection, some academics found that it wasn't all that it was made out to be. It wasn't so successful. Despite the many years of this microfinance running in many areas of the world, poverty has remained at similar levels, if not getting worse. So people began to examine, and it was found that a lot of the claims of microfinance were not true, baseless. It didn't alleviate poverty. It forced a lot of people into further poverty. And there were many disasters around the world, Mexico and Bolivia and India. And, the examples are there for you to see. So it went into a bit of a decline. So those who were supporting it and pushing it as an agenda, being very clever people, remarketed it. They took away the title of microfinance, and suddenly we were talking about financial inclusion. Now apparently it was not about financing the poor people, it's about including them. Really it's the same agenda. It is pushing financialization as far as you can throughout the world. to those corners of the world where it has not reached before, to those poor people, those sectors of the world who, to use the phrase, previously were unbankable. Bring them into the financial systems. And as Professor Asad earlier mentioned, those financial systems are international financial systems, capitalist international financial systems. So financial inclusion, in terms of this Western agenda, is nothing but how to get more and more people into the capitalist system. And we know the capitalist system treats the majority of the world as laborers, some people say slaves, and treats the 1% as the beneficiaries. Okay? Inequality between the rich and the poor of the world has never been as great as it is today. Never. You will see some studies were done in England at the turn of the 20th century. It's a very long time ago, over 110 years ago, which showed that the poor people, the peasants of the Middle Ages, were actually better off than the working class people at the start of the 20th century. Better off in terms of their income, better off in terms of the time they had, better off in terms of the output they gave to their societies. So really, since those times, and if you look at the Middle Ages, we're talking about the times when banking started in Europe. Okay? Since those times to today, the only thing which has been happening on a global scale has been the inequality gap has been increasing. The poor have got poorer, and the rich have got super rich. Okay, the quotation he's mentioned it already. 65 people today, 65 individuals. That's a few of these tables put together, right? 65 individuals own more wealth than 50% of the world put together. Right? How did we get to that situation? Is this a natural situation? Do you think this is a natural economic situation? No. This has come about through centuries of capitalist financial system. So, when we borrow terminology, when we take on concepts which are pushed by the World Bank, which are pushed by the IMF, which are pushed through the United Nations, which are promoted in our media, we, as Muslims, must be intelligent enough to look at those things in a little bit more depth, to analyze them, to consider whether those things are really appropriate for us, what those things really mean, what those concepts are, who is pushing them, and if they are to be applied in the Muslim world, how can we apply them according to our own goals? And this example is really a wonderful example, where you have financial inclusion, but it's not access to lending. It's not getting people into the debt trap. Okay? It's not earning a profit out of poor people. It is helping them in real terms, building toilets, building roads, things which people really need, building schools, building hospitals. This is what is needed. The other thing, this agenda which is being pushed, which says financial inclusion is linked to poverty alleviation, that once you get people into the finance cycle, you will start to alleviate poverty. This is a falsehood. There is no data to determine this. In fact, the data goes against this. Simply getting somebody into the banking system has no effect on their poverty. Why? It's clear for you to see. You know Pakistan. If you get a poor farmer in Balochistan into the banking system, why will he not become wealthy in 5 years' time? What are the other reasons which are holding him back? Okay? What is the other inclusion which we need? Because simply having money is not enough. You get a loan, 10 lakh rupees loan. You want to do a business. What are the hurdles in Pakistan for establishing businesses? Can you buy land? Have you got the rights, property rights? Is somebody going to take it off you? If they take it off you, can you take him to court? Will you spend the next 100 years fighting your case in court? There are legal barriers. Then there are social barriers. Okay? We have bonded labor in Pakistan still, which is really an immense crime against humanity. And yet in Pakistan it exists. And it is allowed to exist. How? Why? Who allows it to exist? What are these political barriers? Social barriers, economic barriers, wider economic barriers, education as a barrier. Okay? Somebody gets money, the other thing is that you give somebody money, he will spend it on his health needs before he spends it on his business needs, because you have not taken care of his health issues. So simply getting somebody into the bank, simply getting somebody to save some money will hardly impact the poverty alleviation, and the data shows it. You can study the global data on poverty alleviation, and you will see that getting people into the banking system has little or no effect on poverty alleviation whatsoever. So yes, financial inclusion, but that's not the only thing. Okay? It's a buzzword, everybody's on the bandwagon, we want to get people into banking. The banks obviously are interested in it, right? There's no need to clarify that, that's their business. But will it really give us in society those economic benefits which we need, which we want, which we desire, which we say are ethical and just and fair? The justice system, where is it? So these other things, what about the inclusion of those things? What about justice inclusion? What about rights inclusion? What about insaniyat inclusion, humanity inclusion? We sit here today, in Pakistan all sorts of things are happening. I don't need to explain to you. Yeah? What are we feeling about those things? What are we feeling about those people? Simply to get them into banks? Is that all the thing we can think about, that we have to give them banking? So these are wider issues, and really when we as a nation, and I speak about the Muslim Ummah as a nation, not just Pakistan, as a nation which has its own values, its own beliefs of an akhirah and an accountability and an asking on one day and a responsibility here in the dunya, then it's more about humanity than it is about materialism. Okay? Simply handing somebody a wad of notes is not going to make any difference. Our societies need to change on a more fundamental level. And inclusion, I would say financial inclusion is the last thing we should be thinking about, after we address all the previous steps. Then yes, get them into businesses and get them into these things. Humanity demands other things first. And if we talk about development, poverty alleviation is a part of the development agenda. If we talk about development, then we should not be in the capitalist mindset of thinking that development is economic development only, or development is financial development only. For Muslims, development starts with humanity development. Okay? And the simple illustration of this is, if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the ahkam of riba and transactions and economy were some of the final ayats to be revealed in Medina. Once the bedrock of society had been established, once the justice had been established, once the ukhuwah and brotherhood had been established, once the feeling for sadaqah had been established, you take care of those fundamentals. The iman had been built in Makkah. People saw themselves as brothers. People worked for the akhirah, not for the development of Medina city. Right? There were things that were more important. And there are many illustrations of this. The Prophet ﷺ's daughter Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, she came to him once and she was very needy. She was amongst the poor people, very needy. And she came to him and she said, there is some funds in the Baytul Mal, can you please donate a slave girl for as a servant so she can work with me? And the reply of the Prophet ﷺ was really illuminating. He said, while there still exists one poor person in Medina how can I give you something? How can I give you my daughter, who he said, you are a piece of me? How can I give you anything while there is still one poor person in Medina? So the emphasis on what? Where is the vision? The vision is on inclusiveness. This is inclusiveness. Right? It's an inclusiveness of the heart. Not just an inclusiveness of money and finance and banking and economics. So development, and I'll conclude with this, when we talk about these terms, which we have taken from the West, inclusion, development, we need to think what it means for us as Muslims. We have our own definitions. Okay, we have forgotten the Arabic words, we have forgotten the prophetic terminology, but let us at least take a minute to think, is it the same inclusion that they mean in the World Bank? Or do we have another model? Is it the same development that they talk about in the West? Or does Islam promote a different type of development first? So that's it. I will leave you with that idea, just to think a little bit more deeply when we talk about these things. Thank you very much.